down the obvious names that everybody who has been, you know, of my time in architecture, because the names were people like Frank Lloyd Wright, they were people like Mies and Corbusier and Gropius, and so there was like the European school of what became modern architecture, the international style, as Philip Johnson called it, were really, if you were thinking broadly as an architect, they were sort of substantial names and therefore for substantial designers. And so living in Australia, it's like living in Australia with regard to art, or at that period of time, theatre even. You know, your contact with that is in a book. It's not in reality. And so I went to America, of course, to work there, but I also went there to have that reality as part of my life, you know, that I could go and touch Frank Lloyd Wright buildings and walk inside of them and see them.
And did you?
And I did. Oh yes, I did extensively. I probably worked my way through a very large number of them. I've seen some of Mies' work because it's there. You know, you go downtown to Denver and there's a Mies building. You know, you go downtown in the cities that were being built, and if it's not a Mies building, then it's an I.M. Pei building, or it's a building of significance in terms of name architects, if we want to call them that, of that period of time. I have not seen a lot of Corbusier's work. I've seen Chandigarh in India, and I've seen he did a lovely building called the Carpenter Building at Harvard University. But just to be able to be a part of the reality of 20th century architecture was something you couldn't do here.
Or somewhere else.
Yes.
Well, Louis Kahn is someone you've mentioned a couple of times.
Yes, and people have written about him as being an influence. And I think there's probably, I've never thought about it that way, but there's probably some truth. Again, I've seen a bit of his work. I have been to every state in America except Alaska. And so that tells you what I do with my time there, which was that every time I got a chance, I travelled as much as I could and wanted to see the country. And a lot of that travel had to do with wanting to look up particular buildings. I've written a little bit about the nasty man of architecture, which is Philip Johnson, because people speak poorly of him. But, you know, this is disappointing to me. But in terms of America, and it's happening here now, it's starting to be better. But in terms of America, I thought there was at that stage, you know, there were sort of like dominant people that were very outspoken and very significant and were very public in where they stood with regard to architecture. You know, the obvious name is Ada Louise Huxtable, because she was an architectural critic of such enormous power and significance. You know, this woman could tell people, you know, to go away. She was even better than Prince Charles at being able to do this. I mean, she could really, you know, wreck them if she wanted to. She had that kind of capacity as a writer with the New York Times, and you know, you used to get the Sunday paper so you could read her column and see who she was pulling up the ladder or throwing down into the pit.
Did you ever meet her?
No, she died just
She died
the other day.
in January
Yes.
this year. Yeah.
And you know, there was people like Rachel Carson, and there were people like the woman in New York who also died recently, who wrote the book on planning.
Jane Jacobs? No.
Yes,
No.
Jane Jacobs. Yes.
Right.
And so there were these strong voices, you know, and there were. Philip Johnson was a strong voice. He was not only outrageously outspoken, but he was making architects, you know, he was encouraging architecture, he was involving controversial discussion in those areas.
Well, Boyd was here. to some
Boyd
extent.
was here, and Boyd was, Boyd was. I think we haven't had another Boyd. I think that's the problem, and I think we are. I just thought that sort of recently we're starting to have a bit more public voice about architecture than we've had, but I think it's been pretty absent for quite a long while,